camera?
Not camera.
On the microphone.
Microphone.
Okay.
For all of us.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to make it so that we can't hear anybody except for Mom and us.
Yeah, I couldn't hear you.
Because you muted yourself.
I muted ours? I didn't tap us. Come see.
It's right there. See, we're muted.
We're muted?
Yeah, see, it has a special. I didn't know. I thought
Okay.
when I had to slack the room, we were muted.
Okay, I think we're ready to start.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay. What's your first question?
What was the fad when you were younger?
What was the fad?
The fad at what age?
Middle school.
What?
Middle school.
Middle school.
In middle school, the fad was Elvis Presley. And
Fad in our middle school.
some of those rock bands, but you had to when you wore your pants to school, you had to have a real thin belt that was about 1/4 of an inch wide, and also if your pants hung down a little bit like Seth used to be, that was probably all right too.
Maybe not quite that far though.
But not quite as far. And then if your mother would let your hair grow long enough so you could comb it with a ducktail in the back, that was cool too. But mine didn't often last that long. If it got too long, she'd maybe go down to see Billy Wilson and get my hair cut, which cost back to buy candy at the candy store on the way home. So that was thought of a really great fad in elementary school, and that was marbles every spring. And all of a sudden it gets spring, and the kids would show up with a sock with some marbles about the big as a hard ball, and you'd bring those to school, and we'd play keeps on the playground. And by the end of the time that got 6 or 8 weeks into it, there got to be so many marbles and kids that the principal shut it down and made it stop because it got to be with the marble. And of course, everyone was trying to get the Steelies, or I can't remember.
There's Aggies.
Yeah, there was Aggies and Steelies. Steelies were a ball bearing. They were great for knocking another marble out of the ring. Anyway, that's 2 things I can think of.
So for me, the difference between our schooling is that Papa lived in the same town and went with the same friends all the way from kindergarten through high school. I never lived in the same town longer than 2 years. So when I was in Africa, my mom homeschooled me, and when I was in the United States, I'd go to a private Christian school or a public school. As far as fads were concerned, we played more poofy skirts with big fluffy net slips, and we dip the slips into starch and they'd stick out, and the farther you could get them to stick up, the bigger better it was. And then the hairstyle for me, when I was in about 5th or 6th grade, I got my hair cut real short, and then they put really tight curlers and permanent, and then when they came out, I looked like I had curls all over my head, sort of like Anna Maris when her hair is short. And they called it a poodle cut, and that was really stylish. But that was only when I was in the United States. When I was in Africa, there was no style at all. Just keep your clothes on. Of course, the Africans didn't care about that either, but my parents thought it was important. So,
Did you ever wear the hoop skirts with the?
hula hoop. I didn't wear the hoop skirts. I wore the, what were they called? Bouffant skirts.
The poodle skirt?
What?
Poodle?
Well, the poodle skirt was what was on the outside. There would be a flannel skirt with a poodle on it, but it was the slips underneath that made them stick out so far. Lots of slips. The more slips, the better. The really rich girls had, they walked, and when they walked down the hallway at school, they took up 4 feet of the hallway with their skirts. Next question.
What was your favorite subject?
My favorite subject by the time I got to high school was biology. I really enjoyed it, and that was my best teacher, Mr. Smallwood. I mean, we'd come down and actually work in class a couple of evenings a week, and everything he demanded was very precise and had to be done just his way. And it was an amazing experience. And I showed Mom or Grandma the other day. We saw it in my scrapbook. We had a frog that we dissected, and the first thing we did before we dissected this frog that was about that was we had to draw it so we could document which frog was ours, and it had to be to the millimeter. And I remember working on that for hours. And
It's a good looking frog. You did a nice job on the shading.
And then shade it, and yeah, he was a great teacher. I never went to kindergarten. They didn't have kindergarten, and Mom put me in a preschool before we moved to Mountain Home. She didn't make me go, and she ended up being my teacher at home, I think, without telling me that. I'd read a little bit and then go out and play, and then come in and she'd have me write my numbers to 20 or 30 or, it was just kindergarten at home. And then, so the actual first grade that I went to was first grade, and it was in the old elementary school there in the middle of town that doesn't exist today. And it was kind of a fun place to go to school. That's also where later on we had our scout meetings. It was in the basement of that school. And now, you that are in Gaithersburg, you need to listen to this, but don't ever repeat it to anybody, because they might come and try to pick me up. Our scout troop actually had a gun range in the basement of the school, and we would do target practice down there with 22 rifles, and that was actually in the school, but not during school.
So my favorite, I went to kindergarten at Loma Vista Elementary School in Maywood, California, and I liked it okay. They always make us go and lay down. We had to lay on our backs on our little mats and keep our hands on our stomach or our chest. And then I knew I never slept. I wouldn't sleep in those things, but somehow when I'd wake up, I'd have a cookie in my hand. So they went around and gave us cookies if we took our nap, and I fell asleep. Well, then I went to first grade at Maywood Christian School, and I had a teacher named Miss Lewis. She was a really pretty lady. She was a heavy-set single lady, and her name was Mary Jane, her first name. So when I got my doll, my doll that I bought when I was 7, I named her Mary Jane after Miss Lewis. Well, in first grade, there was the cutest boy, Dwight Sampson. I thought he was really cute. And he seemed to think I was kind of cute too, because he'd come and talk to me by my desk, or he'd pass me notes and stuff, little scribbly first grade notes. But when I left and went back to Africa, the school had a little party for me, and he came and gave me a brooch that had multiple colored jewels on it. A couple of them had fallen out. I don't know where he got it from, but he stashed it from somewhere. A used necklace with the jewels falling out, and I kept that for the longest time because it was from Dwight Sampson, and he was a pretty good-looking boy. So, then we left and we went to France when I was 7, and we took a boat to France because my mother, which would be your great grandmother, great grandma Marita, um, was afraid of airplanes. We had been on airplanes, but they just terrified her. So we went on a boat, and they made her sick. So we would get on the boat, and as soon as they let the rope off the boat and it's pulling away, she said, "Oh, I got to go erp," and she'd go erp and just erp. The whole trip, just vomit and vomit. We had a bucket in our room, and the room just stunk of puke. So nobody hung out in the room. I didn't want to go in there and sleep even. But anyhow, we went to France, and I went to public school in France, and they put me there. Mom and Dad went to a class to learn how to speak French. Oh, excuse me, because we were going to be going to Togo, which was a French-speaking country. So we went and lived a year in France, and I went to Montfleury school, and the teacher there, when my dad took me in to sign me in, she said, well, that she spoke English, which I couldn't understand it, but she spoke English, and we would get along just fine, but she was only going to speak French. So that's how I ended up learning French, is they put me in class, and off we went. And back then, we had a wooden desk with a hole. Where is this? A hole up in the front of the desk with a little ink bottle in it, and she'd come by and pour ink into the ink bottle, and then we had pens, dip pens with nibs, and the nib was split on the end so that you could form your letters. Only I would push too hard, and I would bend my nibs, and I'd get in trouble. So I had to pull them out and fix them up, and we bought more nibs, and I got in trouble for that too. Anyhow, another thing that was funny about that is that my mom made me wear long johns, but she cut them off at the knees because she'd only let me wear skirts. So I had skirt-length long johns, and the other little girls wore cute little hand-crocheted T-shirts and stuff like that. And when we'd have physicals or do anything with PE, there I am in my cut-off long johns, and the girls were in their pretty little lacy things. I was just so embarrassed all the time. And let's see what happened else. So when we went to Africa, we left France, we went to Africa. My mom taught me, and I had learned how to read at home before kindergarten, and I knew my numbers, and we just did it. There was nothing special about being homeschooled because there really was no public school to go to in Africa. There were some schools taught by the priests, but they were not very good educationally at all. So we just homeschooled me. And we ordered it from a company called Calvert School out of Maryland, Baltimore, Maryland. And I think they still exist. I think they still exist there. And so we had to do our correspondence back and forth on really, really thin paper called onion skin paper, because they had everything that we mailed had to be weighed. And so we'd mail our homework and back and forth, and it'd take 2 or 3 weeks to get there and 2 or 3 weeks to come back, and then it'd have mistakes in it, and I'd have to correct the mistakes, and it'd go back again. And then I'd take tests, but the teacher was nice, would write little notes little letters, well, happy birthday, or how's your dog doing, and things like that, to try to make it more like a school. We never talked on the telephone. We didn't have internet. We didn't have movies. We didn't have any of that stuff. Just letters. And so I went through a homeschool through Calvert School up through about 7th grade. And when I came back to the United States, I was way ahead of everybody because my mom made sure that I did every single lesson and got them all right. And she helped me learn with the use of a ruler on my tush. And so I came back and I was way ahead of the kids. So they thought I was smart. I really wasn't smart. It's just that I'd had to do all the work. And let's see, what else was there? When we got back to the United States, I was put into 6th grade. It was kind of like a middle school. They called it Everett A. Ray Junior High School in Costa Mesa, California. And by the way, I'm giving you all this stuff for you to put into your family history information about stuff you're accumulating on us. Anyhow, Everett A. Junior High School, and my mom let me buy some Tangy lipstick. Now, Tangy was a particular name brand that if you put it on one person's skin, they would turn pink, but if it turned on somebody else, their skin tones made the lipstick look different for some reason, and that was pretty fancy, very fancy lipstick. And then this other little boy was from our church, Assemblies of God, and he told me I was a sinner because I wore lipstick, so I got in trouble for hitting him. And you're not supposed to hit boys over lipstick. So then after that, we went back to Africa, and I was in a boarding school called Josh School, and it was a correspondence school. We lived in dormitories, and we used the stuff, mailing it back and forth. And I took piano lessons there, and I took PE there, and we had competition with another private school called Kent Academy, and I was a cheerleader. Not like you see here, but a cheerleader nonetheless. Red satin skirt and a white satin shirt, and I just did the jump ups and so on. And then when it was time to compete in the field trip, I took my skirt off and I had red satin bloomers, and I ran around the track in red satin bloomers. I really thought I was hot stuff. And then I came back to the United States when I was 16, and I went to public high school at Costa Mesa High School. And then I went to college in University of Redlands.
Well, I went to Mountain Home Elementary for 3 or 4 years, and then they had built a new elementary school a few blocks away, and it was called East Elementary, and that's where my mother started teaching 3rd grade. So I think I went there for 5th and 6th grade, and my mother was there teaching down the hall. I do remember before she got a classroom, she substituted part of 1 year, and one day she came to substitute in my class at school. And I don't remember my mother ever calling me anything but Pete or Petey or something like that, And we were reading stuff out loud in class out of a book, and I remember my mother calling on John, because at school I was only known as John by my first name. And I remember she looked at me and she says, "John, will you read the next 3 paragraphs," or something like that. I don't know what it was exactly, but I remember her looking at me. I didn't know who she was talking to, even though all the time at school, Mrs. Braddock always called me John. And but when my mom called me John, it took a time or two for her to get my attention and to read.
Isn't that the school you went to where they had an escape slide out the window of the 2nd floor?
No, that was the first one.
On the second floor of the elementary school, they had you could push up the window and then hop on this slide and go out if there was a fire. It was a fire escape slide. Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah. And the last day of school, they'd let us go out and slide down the slide. So that was the fun part about that. And then after that, I went to junior high, which by that time was the old high school. And the old high school is where I first watched high school basketball games. And by the time I got to junior high, it had become the old high school. And I went 2 years there. Now, I tell you, the most important thing I learned there was the first week of school in seventh grade. Well, one thing I really liked about it was as you went from classroom to classroom, you weren't in the same classroom all day, and you had different teachers. And but the one thing I do remember was PE, physical education, and they required that the boys wore blue shorts and like a uniform, a specified T-shirt. And when I showed up the first day, I didn't have, Mom hadn't gone down with me to buy my PE clothes, so I didn't have any PE clothes. And I remember the teacher looking at the 4 or 5 of us that didn't have our PE clothes, and he says, well, if you don't dress out, then you have to go out and run. So we had to go out and run around this big sports field with our regular shoes on, and our regular school clothes. So I was really all sweaty when I got done, but I know after running an hour, and he told us if he ever saw us